Welcome to today's episode called Jules Kroll and the Birth of Corporate Intelligence. And yeah, I know, it might not sound thrilling, but what if I told you that the world's most feared corporate investigator got his first break from Spider-Man, and that same man would go on to secretly chase billions of plundered wealth across 5 continents. He uncovered Saddam Hussein's Parisian investments, billions in missing gold reserves of the fallen Soviet Union, like from Wall Street dealmakers to Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists to governments. They all came to Jules Kroll because this is the man who turned private investigation into a billion-dollar business empire. He became known as the CIA of Wall Street, or rather his firm did. And in this episode, we dive into the story not only of how Kroll built a global intelligence operation, but we're also, more interestingly, going to dig into a few of the great cases and stories that built his reputation and his business. So enjoy. And just a quick reminder, while these shorter weekly episodes released every Wednesday are free for everyone, for just $1.99 a month, you get access to our co-hosted hour-long episodes released on the first of every month, where Keith and I do an even deeper dive into an incredible business story. Some of these hour-long episodes are still free in our back catalogue, so you can get a taste of what to expect. Now, as well as getting access to these monthly co-hosted hour-long episodes, behind the paywall are additional bonus episodes. And over the coming months, we'll be adding more bonus episodes for subscribers regularly. Some of these are 2-parters, some are 3-parters, and some are standalone episodes. Also, as a subscriber, you can listen to these weekly episodes ad-free, so you won't have to listen to me telling you about our great subscription offer. And it is a great offer for just $1.99 a month. You can subscribe via Apple subscriptions, Spotify subscriptions, or on Patreon using the link below, or go to patreon.com/great business stories. Jules Kroll was born in 1941 to a working class family, and he grew up, as he said, watching his father, who was a small time printing shop owner, struggle to stay honest in a business that was plagued by kickbacks. As he said himself, he said, it was pretty dispiriting. It made me pretty angry, recalling the years where he saw firsthand how these purchasing agents would routinely demand gifts and kickbacks for contracts. And it took a toll on his father, someone who was an honest businessman trying to do things the right way. And so from very early on, Kroll had this hatred for graft, and he resolved to fight it. He said, I'm going to make this my mission. Now, after graduating from Cornell and then law school, he went to work for Robert Kennedy during the 1968 presidential campaign. This was the campaign that Kennedy was assassinated on. Kroll then ran for office himself in 1971 for the New York City Council on an anti-corruption ticket. It ended in a bruising loss, and ironically, he was trashed by a Democratic candidate who later went to jail for the very corruption that Kroll was warning about. In 1972, Kroll launched J. Kroll Associates with a pretty unique business model. He would help companies uncover graft in their procurement departments, but rather than take an actual payment, rather than take a traditional fee, he'd take a cut of the savings instead. And his first break came from Marvel Comics. And Kroll's investigation into their printing contracts, they found padded bills and bribes, and he saved the company a fortune. As a result, Marvel cancelled the commission deal and actually put him on a retainer. And as Kroll quipped later in life, he said, Spider-Man, the Hulk, I really owe my business to those superheroes. What's very interesting about Kroll is that he rejected the seedy private eye stereotype, the trench coat, divorce spying private eye kind of image. He wanted to legitimize private detective work at a different level. He wanted to elevate it into the corporate boardroom. And he was a very, very astute marketer. He knew that to win the trust of Fortune 500 clients, he had to look and act like a top-tier professional services company. And so he dressed the part. Rumour has it that his third hire was a chauffeur, and so he was driven around Manhattan. And this projected an air of confidence. There was nothing small-time or nothing servile about Jules Kroll. And the reason is because he knew how sensitive and high stakes the nature of his work was. Like, you're carrying out investigations on behalf of banks, corporations, governments. And as a result, he was entitled to a seat at the top table, and so he behaved like that. And it wasn't vanity, this was strategic. By projecting this air of integrity and confidence, he made clients trust him with their secrets. His operation was dubbed the Rolls-Royce of private investigation firms. It was pricey but polished, with law firms and corporate boards all turning to him for sensitive jobs that they just weren't willing to hand over to other people or other firms. Interestingly as well, if a client invited him to solve one problem, he made sure to solve every problem he found by being able to offer additional services. When I was reading this, it sounded to me kind of like, McKinsey and those other type of consultants, in the way that you'd hire McKinsey to do a certain task, maybe you think 6 months tops, and 3 years later you find that you're still paying them. Kroll said, once you've been invited into someone's dining room to feed them, you want to have more than salad to offer. You gain their trust. They're going to want to try your soup and your dessert. And so Kroll diversified into forensic accounting, crisis management, competitor analysis, whatever it took to more or less comprehensively guard his clients' interests. By the early 80s, Kroll had turned this small-time investigative boutique into a pioneer of corporate intelligence. And as Wall Street's deal frenzy took hold, you're talking about hostile takeovers, junk bonds, LBOs, Kroll became indispensable. And by now his employees included former prosecutors, academics, accountants, of course, ex-cops who were his first employees, and women as well. As he said, you need at least one woman on any team. She'll have a different view. Now, by reputation, Kroll became known as ruthless, relentless, and intimidating force in the investigative world. But those who met him talk about somebody who's different, how approachable he was, and how he was a very gracious family man. And for this family man persona, it wasn't just a show. He remained married to the same woman. His children have spoken about how he never missed a game, how he was always there for them, was never too busy to make time for them. It's a very admirable and not very common quality you see in many billionaires. Kroll also enforced no cowboys rule. This was his term for mercenaries and PIs who would wiretap, bribe, break the law to get intel. But Kroll's team relied on painstaking legal methods. We're talking public records, interviews, human sources. And of course, that's exactly how it should work. The worst thing that could ever happen is that the investigators become the story, that they get caught up in a scandal by operating outside of the law. A defining moment came in 1982. This is after Drexel Burnham Lambert, the American multinational investment bank, they nearly underwrote a scam charter flight company, and its CEO asked their law firm Skadden Arps for a list of recommended investigators, and the reply came back, yeah, you can go with Dick Tracy, Sherlock Holmes, Charlie Chan or Jules Kroll. And from then on, Drexel wouldn't fund a deal without Kroll's input, and that was a big opening for the company into Wall Street. And soon to Kroll became a verb on Wall Street, as in we need to Kroll him or we need to Kroll that company. And in 1986, the firm expanded globally, opening up offices in London, Tokyo, Singapore and Paris. Kroll was now a global intelligence operation. Now, as corporate raiders circled Fortune 500 companies during the 80s, Kroll became the defence team's secret weapon. By 1988, the firm had handled hundreds of takeover battles, and they'd quietly, dig into the raiders' past, hoping to find something explosive or some sort of leverage that would allow them or their client to get a settlement. Oil tycoon T. Boone Pickens, who's a guy I am definitely going to do a story on. He was one of the biggest corporate raiders in the late 70s, early 80s. But I think it's worth doing an episode on him for his name alone. But he hated Kroll the most. He accused Kroll of keeping a 2-foot thick dossier on him and charging companies up to $500,000 for it. When the magazine Business Week suspected that traders were accessing its stock tips column before publication, it turned to Kroll. Investigators staked out this California printing plant that printed the magazine, and they found the employee who was leaking the information. Now, one of Kroll's most controversial episodes came in 87-88 during the SEC's investigation into Drexel, the company that had him on a retainer, and their star employee, junk bond king Michael Milken, another guy that we're going to do a story on. This is what I love about the Kroll story. There are so many tangents and so many other stories that we're going to cover at some stage. Michael Milken is definitely top of the list. So Kroll's team, on behalf of Drexel, gathered information on Ivan Boesky. This was a hugely successful trader who had turned informant against Milken. An interesting little side note, Boesky is credited with having uttered the immortal lines, "Greed is good," or words to that effect, which Oliver Stone then used in the movie Wall Street. But Kroll went one step further and also started investigating the SEC staff and the prosecutors involved in the case. And the SEC got wind of this, and they were so alarmed that they had to ask a judge to force Drexel to turn over the records of Kroll's investigations. Now, by all accounts, Kroll's findings were meant to intimidate and impeach the government's efforts, which is a pretty ballsy defence tactic. In the end, Drexel settled with regulators in 1989. Milken himself pleaded guilty in 1990 and went to jail. Drexel itself was forced into bankruptcy in 1990. So there is a great story here, and it's covered in fantastic detail in James B. Stewart's book, Den of Thieves, I think it's called. I read it years ago, but I'll have to get back to it. And as I said, we are going to do a story on that. But Kroll's behind-the-scenes role in the defence, it was a real striking example of corporate intrigue. And of course, it didn't damage Kroll's reputation at all. By the close of the 80s, Kroll Associates were handling over 1,100 cases a year, and the firm charged steep fees, $50,000 upfront for a basic takeover job, but clients considered it money well spent, because what clients got in return, it wasn't just information, it was certainty. He legitimised private detective work at a corporate level. Like, he was blending integrity, discretion with results. Now, a good story that's off Wall Street completely came in 1987, which is called the Heroin Trail, and this cemented Kroll's reputation as being able to find the proverbial needle in a haystack. So in the spring of 1987, the 30 million libel case of Cara Duman versus Newsday, it was unravelling before the defenders' eyes, because at its core was Newsday's Pulitzer Prize winning expose called The Heroin Trail. So there's this big article which named Turkish nightclub owner Mahmoud Karaduman as a major heroin smuggler. Now, Floyd Abrams, the renowned First Amendment attorney defending the paper, he had built his case on the testimony of two retired Turkish narcotic officials. But in a stunning courtroom reversal, both witnesses recanted. They denied ever implicating Karaduman or even meeting the reporters. Abrams was stunned as he said, "My last two witnesses recanted everything. We were left without a leg to stand on." Enter Jules Kroll. Abrams placed an emergency call to the private investigator asking if Kroll's network could identify anyone at all who had first-hand knowledge of Karaduman's drug deals. Within 2 weeks, Kroll delivered. His team located a former low-level operative in Karaduman's smuggling ring, now living quietly in LA. Kroll investigators persuaded him to testify, ensured his safety, and vetted his claims. His testimony turned the tide. The jury ultimately found that Newsday wasn't liable, ruling that the journalists hadn't acted irresponsibly. Abrams later credited Kroll with salvaging the case. As he said, "Kroll came through. I was stunned." Then in the late 80s, Kroll's reach extended beyond Wall Street. Kroll Associates became the firm of choice when it came to investigating corrupt leaders and officials, earning them the nickname the CIA of Wall Street. Because after the 1986 ousters of Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines and Baby Doc Duvalier in Haiti, both new governments hired Kroll to track their stolen fortunes. And just a quick reminder, while these shorter weekly episodes released every Wednesday are free for everyone, for just $1.99 a month you get access to our co-hosted hour-long episodes released on the first of every month, where Keith and I do an even deeper dive into an incredible business story. Some of these hour-long episodes are still free in our back catalogue, so you can get a taste of what to expect. Now, as well as getting access to these monthly co-hosted hour-long episodes, behind the paywall are additional bonus episodes. And over the coming months, we'll be adding more bonus episodes for subscribers regularly. Some of these are 2-parters, some are 3-parters, and some are standalone episodes. Also, as a subscriber, you can listen to these weekly episodes ad-free, so you won't have to listen to me telling you about our great subscription offer. And it is a great offer for just $1.99 a month. You can subscribe via Apple subscriptions, Spotify subscriptions, or on Patreon using the link below, or go to patreon.com/Great Business Stories. And Kroll's international reputation soared in 1991 when the Kuwaiti government in exile hired him to trace Saddam Hussein's hidden fortune in the aftermath of the Gulf War. And the firm's team of ex-detectives and analysts, they tracked down more than $6 billion in Iraqi oil wealth parked in foreign accounts. And among the more controversial revelations was that Saddam had secretly become a shareholder in Hachette, a huge publisher in France. They published Elle magazine, among others. The scandal, of course, erupted in Paris, where Kroll's actions, they were suspected of being little more than a CIA proxy mission. But of course, it wasn't. This is a charge that has been levelled at Kroll down through the years by corrupt politicians and their lackeys. As we shall see in the next case, this was their investigation into post-Soviet kleptocracy. So the story goes that in the aftermath of the Soviet Union's collapse in late 1991, rumours were swirling of this vast Communist Party gold reserve that had been siphoned off abroad. And Soviet press reports, they spoke of anywhere from 12 billion to 100 billion in today's money in hard currency and assets secretly stashed in foreign bank accounts, as well as all the gold. And the Communist Party's longtime business manager, he fell to his death from a Moscow window in August 1991. His death, which was officially ruled as suicide, it fueled suspicions that he knew too much. Indeed, Soviet bank insiders alleged that in the months before the USSR's collapse, billions in party money were quietly transferred overseas. One report claimed that nearly 10% of Russia's gold reserves, some 200 tons, had been spirited to Switzerland. By the end of 91, the new Russian Federation under new President Boris Yeltsin, they faced a pretty harsh truth. Like, the state coffers were nearly empty, and yet huge sums of public wealth had just vanished. And so in March 92, Yeltsin's government contracted Kroll to identify where all the wealth had disappeared to and who had stolen it. From the outset, though, the political risks were pretty grave, because by hiring foreigners to hunt down communist-era thieves, Yeltsin's government, they were implicitly accusing elements of the Red Army and the KGB of theft. And this wasn't one dictator's bank account they were chasing, as with Marcos or Baby Doc or Saddam. This was hundreds of accounts across dozens of countries and implicating a number of very, very high-ranking officials, many of whom were either still in positions of power or had access or control over people in key positions. And as a result, the Kroll team, who were on the ground in Moscow, they had to keep a very low profile. They literally had to watch their backs. Now, by May 1992, only weeks into the job, the investigators began scoring very early breakthroughs, and Jules Kroll, in a very rare public update, he revealed that his team had already uncovered tangible assets abroad. As he said, apartment buildings, hotels, ships, art collections, all purchased with Soviet public money siphoned off by officials. And the mood within Kroll's investigating team, you can imagine, it alternated between zeal as each new discovery would buoy them, and then anxiety as they wondered how the powerful figures they are exposing might retaliate. Because the investigation identified several high-ranking figures believed to be the architects of this looting, and while their names weren't announced to the media, sources indicate that Kroll zeroed in on a close-knit group of ex-communist officials. These were former KGB generals, communist industrial managers, and propagandists turned businessmen. But by mid-1992, there were signs of pushback, as you'd expect. Inside the Russian government, not everyone was happy with the aggressive treasure hunt. Nationalists and communist hardliners in Russia's parliament began denouncing the reformers for airing the dirty laundry to foreigners. Some intimated that inviting Kroll in was this affront to national Russian sovereignty, or even a spy operation in disguise. And moreover, behind the scenes, some of the very agencies that were supposed to help Kroll were, of course, dragging their feet. They got very little support from Russian authorities. And given that Russia was now seeing a surge in organised crime and contract killings by the early 90s, I remember you'd read the papers and every second day there were officials being shot in Moscow. So there were fears for the safety of the investigators. Now, Kroll did discreetly, he approached Western intelligence agencies for help in tracing the hidden funds. But in Washington, the request, it sparked this internal debate, because while the CIA and the NSA had the tools to follow the money, aiding this private probe into Russian corruption, it sat in a very murky policy zone. And the request for assistance was ultimately turned down. Reasons and concerns ranged from exposing sources to this bizarre argument that the stolen Soviet money might actually help Russia, as some of the money would eventually find its way back into Russia and therefore help revive its economy. I mean, a pretty spurious argument there. And ultimately, it would appear that the US government was getting pushback from Russian authorities, so there wasn't really the political will in the US to help Kroll with their investigations. However, despite this, Kroll's findings were staggering. The firm estimated that 14 billion in today's money had already been laundered into Western banks by August 1991, and they projected that as much as 50 billion was stolen. The Russian parliament even passed a law to recover the stolen money as a direct result of these findings, but as you'd expect, politics then got in the way. Only a paltry amount was actually recovered, and politicians who had supported Kroll's investigation were replaced. Inside Kroll, there was a recognition that the political winds had shifted. As Kroll said, "We found good stuff, but it turned out they didn't want it." The Russian government stonewalled, and then the fees that they owed Kroll went unpaid. And then, in 2006, Russia retaliated with an investigation into whether Kroll had operated illegally on Russian soil. So, typically Russian, isn't it? Another really interesting case that Kroll was involved in the early 90s is a case that had stumped police, and this was the suspicious death of Italian financier Roberto Calvi. Now, I've read a good few books on the mob, a few books on the Vatican, and the story of Roberto Calvi features prominently in many of them. Calvi was chairman of Banco Ambrosiana, Italy's second largest private bank, and his close ties with the Vatican, it earned him the moniker God's banker. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about Roberto Calvi and about this story, but I never knew about Kroll's involvement in it. So under Calvi's leadership, Banco Ambrosiana became entangled in this web of illicit activities, including money laundering for the mafia and various financial shenanigans with the Vatican. And the bank's collapse in 1982, it exposed this labyrinth of financial malpractice and corruption. And on June 18th, 1982, Calvi was found hanged beneath London's Blackfriars Bridge, his pockets weighed with bricks and carrying a falsified passport. It's such a dramatic, dark image. It's like something out of The Godfather. Now, initially, his death was deemed to be a suicide, until Kroll was hired by his family nearly a decade later, and reconstructing the scaffolding and analysing Calvi's pristine shoes, Kroll investigators proved that he hadn't climbed the bridge alone. It was murder, and British authorities reclassified the death accordingly. In 2005, Italian prosecutors, they charged 5 individuals with Calvi's murder, and after a protracted trial, all 5 defendants were acquitted due to insufficient evidence. But, significantly, the court acknowledged that Calvi had been murdered but couldn't conclusively determine who had done it, and the case remains one of the most controversial episodes in modern financial history. It's a fascinating story. Now, on the business front, in 1993, Kroll sold 22% of the firm to insurance giant AIG, and with this capital they were able to expand rapidly internationally. Kroll merged then with Ohio-based O'Gara Security in 1997. This company had armoured cars and bodyguards, so the idea was to offer a full spectrum security operation like cyber, physical and financial. And the merged Kroll O'Gara went public on the Nasdaq, and revenue tripled to over 200 million, and in 1999 Blackstone Capital bought the company for $475 million. Now, I couldn't find how much Kroll made from that deal, but he was still left with almost 10% of the new operation. And at the same time, Kroll began planning for succession, because by 2001, at the age of 60, he stepped down from the role of CEO and day-to-day operations to become executive chairman. In July 2004, Marsh and McLennan bought Kroll for $1.9 billion in cash, and Jules Kroll and his family walked away with $117 million. By then, Kroll, the company, was a 5,500 person juggernaut, generating nearly billion in annual revenue. And though Kroll did stay on, the cultural fit apparently was uneasy, and in 2008 he left. Now, since then, Kroll Inc. or Kroll and Associates has gone through various mergers and acquisitions under the ownership of different private equity companies. As of 2025, the company spans cybersecurity, valuation, governance, due diligence, investigations. It employs 6,500 people in 32 countries. Now, Kroll himself, he did briefly consider buying the firm back, but ultimately he launched what is now called K2 Integrity with his son Jeremy, and this is a financial crimes, risk and regulatory advisory firm. It has 340 employees, and he also founded Kroll Bond Rating Agency, which has over 600 employees in offices across America and Europe. So, an amazing entrepreneur. Kroll is 84 years old at the time of recording this, and of course he stepped back from day-to-day running of these businesses and has a net worth of over 2 billion. Like, I just have to admire Jules Kroll for his ability to take the business of private investigations out of this low time, kind of sleazy image that it had, and elevate it, professionalize it, making it this vital resource, not just for Wall Street, but for governments and countries plagued by corruption. But of course, what I love most are the individual stories of corruption, finding out how greedy and nakedly corrupt those Russian officials were. Also, the dramatic court cases, the theft of national wealth and resources by leaders like Marcos Duvalier and Saddam, and all of it brought to light by the man whose guiding philosophy was, and I love this is his own quote, "Sunlight is such a wonderful antiseptic." That's why this is such a great story. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And remember, if you have any comments, any corrections, or any story that you'd like us to cover, email us at info@gbspod.com. All the best, folks.